So the topic for today is lessons learned from Street Fighter 5. Did we learn anything?
Yeah, I feel like there's a lot to discuss about Street Fighter 5, especially because there were so many eyes on it since it was so competitively active and I mean in general it was the last of the Street Fighter series so far.
That's true. I think it ended up pretty well, but I guess I should start by doing a short disclaimer that guys, we're not just hating on Street Fighter 5. I covered this game for like 7 years. I actually really like Street Fighter 5, but I think we should play devil's advocate here and kind of compare some things to Street Fighter 6. See things that maybe we don't want to see return.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's always constructive criticism that we can direct towards the last entry in the series just because we want the next one to be so much better.
So, the biggest grievance, I think we should start things off with unsafe moves becoming safe, especially on V trigger activation. The whole Unga
Yes.
move thing.
Yeah, that's a big part of Street Fighter 5, especially because like you were mentioning the V trigger activation. Basically, especially if you're losing, you're guaranteed to have one around pretty much. So you get all these situations where people are pressing sweep or whatever unsafe move, and then you block it, and then it's safe or plus,
Yeah.
and it just turned the tables completely because then they're plus in your face, and then you have to deal with their offense. So yeah, there's plenty of that in Street Fighter 5.
And the sweep is like always a crush counter for some reason.
Yeah.
You know what's funny? Because in the beta version, or actually before even the beta version, the E3 build that I played, the V trigger system was really limited on activation. You could barely not convert into anything. Like and activate light or medium, definitely not plus enough. But you'd have to be like a heavy punch and have to be a counter hit to even link something after. And I remember talking to Combo Fiend about this, and he was explaining that they didn't want to repeat the mistakes of Street Fighter 4 with the FADC system, where you get all these free, low risk, high reward confirms, like, random uppercut FADC, or low forward fireball, etc. But the problem was that a lot of people felt the V trigger system was too limited. The combos felt too dry, it wasn't flashy enough. You couldn't do
Mhm.
really much cool things on the activation itself because just the reason why is because the activation all had kind of different speeds and they're really slow in the very beginning builds before it even had the online beta. But it's kind of funny now because they made it more flexible, and here we are with Street
Yeah.
Fighter 5 now. And now it's like the same thing where you're getting these really low risk, high reward situations. Even a crush
Well,
counter sweep activate, hard knockdown, you get to do whatever you want basically.
I think the problem is that they found a really good balance on hit because the combos that you get from the V trigger activation is basically one per round, right? Because you don't get to have that many activations every time, like maybe two for some V triggers, but
Yeah, very
it's more
specifically.
the exception rather than the rule. And on hit, with the extra scaling that they added over the course of the seasons and the fact that in general the combos become longer and longer and it works out. I think having one super powerful combo per round is okay. Like you can work around that. But the problem is because of how the cancels work, then you end up with these situations where, like we were saying, these unsafe moves then become plus or safe on block. And that's the thing that is annoying about Street Fighter 5. And I feel like it's mostly the legacy of the fact that they couldn't quite figure out how to do it differently on block and hit. So maybe at a little bit than the rushed nature of Street Fighter 5 that ended up creating this situation rather than, like a conscious balancing effort. So I'm sure that for Street Fighter 6, well, I mean, there's no real system like V trigger
Nothing
cancels.
really that freezes the screen either. So you can,
Yeah.
fish for something and say, hey, the opponent's in the air. I can just do my super. I can get a free uppercut here, and this will convert into a hard knockdown like Akuma's V trigger uppercut. But it was
Like the
really
only
crazy
thing that I could
before. Like,
see comparable is, for example, someone does a normal into a level 2 super, one of those that is like an install, like Jamie's or Giles.
yeah,
But at the end of the day, you're spending 2 meters for that. So maybe it is even fair that it is plus at that point, you get to do something.
but Capcom even doubled down on it near the end. Like we have Sakura EX Tatsu to activate. And there's characters where this is a game where when you're plus in front of someone's face, it's really dangerous because of the whole shimmy game. So being
Mhm.
even +2 is very scary, especially if you get it for free every single round. You can really turn the tides with that.
Yeah. I mean, I think the greatest example of this is when, for example, G does his EX slow smash into the V trigger activation, and
Yeah.
then he's plus on block, and then you have to deal with a command throw that could possibly kill you. I mean, that's just, just the extreme version of all that. Like G is Street Fighter 5 to his extreme. And I mean, in a way, it makes sense if he was supposed to be the boss of this game. So there you go. We figured it out.
Yeah, but it's command grab slow mirror. It's like 12 frames. You can just jump that on reaction.
Oh yeah, I bet you can. Good luck with that.
But don't you think it's really silly? There's some characters where they just rely on that free activation just to make moves safe. Like, for example, Vega or Zeku, where they'll just like do random slides, and every time it hits, they'll do nothing. But when it's finally blocked, they'll activate to make it safe. Like, don't you think that's really silly?
Yeah, it kind of like, again, I think it's not the concept itself that is necessarily bad, but more like the implementation, because you have some V triggers there that maybe are unsafe on block. Like talking about Zeku is V trigger 2, right? And then you have situations where you're fishing with the crouching medium kick and you're visually confirming it to see if it hit, to confirm into the V trigger 2. But if you get it wrong, you die, right? Like that's more interesting. That rewards skill. But
Yeah.
when instead it's made to be the opposite, where you have a move that is unsafe and, oh, whenever it is blocked, you just make it safe. That I think detracts a little bit from the making it interesting, especially if it is very easy to confirm. So
Right.
yeah, I don't particularly like the just make everything safe philosophy, but rather would focus more on the other end, like just reward skill for being able to confirm something into a powerful move instead.
Right, like the V triggers aren't built all, perfectly balanced, and they are supposed to be more powerful versions of the characters. They were supposed to change the way the characters were supposed to be played. It was supposed to turn Bison. He wasn't always supposed to teleport all his dashes. Before, he just had a normal dash like everyone else, and then he was supposed to be this defensive character that turns super rush down when he activates. But it doesn't seem like that. It seems like near the end of Street Fighter V's lifespan, it was more like these V triggers are just kind of free ways to be plus somebody's face, even post activation. Even
Mhm.
Akuma, before even the madness that is whiff fireball and to activate raw, getting the
Yeah.
double fireball in the air and then you get the free pressure situation. There's so many characters that are like that. Aegis Reflector, there's a lot of examples of that. Guile's, sonic booms get in and
Mhm.
pressure, and it's like if you look at Street Fighter 6, a lot of things seem really punishable, even things that were safe before, like even Chun-Li's like EX legs, punishable on
Yeah.
block now. I think we're gonna see less of that in Street Fighter 6 in
Yeah, I
general.
think in general for Street Fighter 5, it seems like at first they were trying to balance the idea of V triggers on blocks, see what they could do to make them less annoying. But it seems like towards the end of the lifespan of the game, they really wanted to give Street Fighter 5 that identity of the very rushdown oriented game, where there's a lot of this, where you get to convert into pressure from V triggers and such. It almost feels like they didn't want it to be kind of like that generic Street Fighter that won't be remembered for anything aside maybe from being balanced. But they wanted it to, like I said, give it an identity. And of course, I'm just conjecturing. Obviously, cannot know for sure, but
Yeah.
it is a possibility that then to distinguish it from any other entry in the series.
It could be something internally too. Like they could have gone through different leadership and had different visions, because this game did go on for 6, 7 years. There's no way it was the exact same team all the way
It
through.
was the shadow of Washiga the entire time.
Where is Woshige? He's around here in Street Fighter 6. I still haven't heard his name used yet in
I
any
don't know.
interviews. Okay, the next thing about Street Fighter 5 that we learned from, I guess the easy ones, we should talk about crush counters.
Oh yeah. Yeah, crush counters, I guess the problem is not, again, the concept itself of a crush counter. It's mostly the fact that we had these situations where a lot of characters had some really, really good normals that they could just spam in neutral and just fish for counter hits, Like, especially because these normals ended up being very often either plus or very difficult to deal with. I think the best example is Urian's standing heavy punch, especially before the nerf,
Oh, the
where it
handshake?
was pretty fast. Yeah, it was pretty fast. If you got crush counter, you got a full dash in crouching heavy punch combo. Was difficult to whiff punish because it was, and you could change the timing by charging it. And if you ended up blocking the charge version, it just happened to be +5 on block. So I mean,
Plus 5. That's ridiculous. I mean, it's
and it
slow. It's slow, right?
yeah, and cancelable then too, just in case.
Just in case.
So, like, I mean, that was just the perfect example of a normal that could just be abused in neutral. They just throw this out, very difficult to deal with it, and if you get hit, you just die. And there's plenty of others too, like Borog's standing heavy kick is another great example of a
Plus
crush
3 on
counter that is
block.
really annoying plus some block. Yeah,
Yeah.
like all of these moves that are clearly meant for rushdown, but they also ended up being good in neutral, especially for because of the normal priority system. Like even looking at Bison, for example, standing heavy kick was never meant to be
Also
really a
plus three on
neutral
block.
button. It
Yeah.
doesn't have that much range, but it could just end up sniping a limb, and getting a crush counter.
Yeah.
As down for a heavy punch, same thing, like being so long reach, it could very easily score a crush counter.
Right. Yeah, that's true. The crush counter system, they kind of tried it in Cross Tekken. It wasn't exactly the same, but there were some normals that had extra hit stun bonuses. Like I remember Sagat, his step kick, where he steps forward and hits you low.
Hmm.
I remember if you got a
Yeah.
counter hit on that in particular, you got like this extra big hit stun where you can do a bigger combo. And I think Kuma, his crouching heavy punch, the bear, like he like sits down on you kind of, and then it causes like this weird crumple state. Like it was really
Mm.
unique. It's not just like hit stun. I'm sure someone in the on the comments will explain this to me, but the difference was it wasn't just like heavy normals, like hey, this button's your crush counter button. It was more like there's these weird kind of wonky buttons that characters have, and if you can figure out a way to get land a counter hit on it, you would get like interesting bonuses, which I think was kind of cool because it made you kind of think out of the box, you know.
Yeah.
But obviously it's different than Street Fighter Five, but it made me think of
Oh,
that.
yeah, yeah. I mean, even in the Street Fighter V's case, I guess the idea of a crush counter is that you basically are trying to find a moment in, like in your pressure, for example, or when your opponent is about to do something, and you get to land this move that like gives you a big reward. That's fine as a concept, but like I said, when you add this on top of a move that is already really good, then you have no other incentive to use other moves. Right.
Yeah.
And that was really the problem with Street Fighter 5 in the sense that it was more like of a move by move, balance situation where we just ended up having these crush counters that were just too spammable, like too good. Really, that was the problem because we have other examples of good crush counters that work in neutral that are not nearly as, like overwhelming. And to be honest, more interesting. Like one of the things that I like to mention all the time is that I don't personally like the spin state crush counter. I think it's a little bit too rewarding. The
Oh, where
crumple
you get a
stage kind
dashing
of.
combo.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. But the moves that give you a knockdown on crush counter, those are a little bit more interesting. Like for example,
Don't say
Gao's
it. Don't
back
say
heavy
it.
punch.
The Guile back heavy punch.
Yeah,
But
or Menat's standing heavy punch, for
but that juggles
example.
into
Those.
super mirror.
Well, I mean, sure, but it's a more situational conversion. Like, it's not something that you get every time. Like, if I have landed a crush counter with back heavy punch and I have super, yes, I get to convert. But for example, if I landed a spin state crush counter, then I would dash up, do a full combo, and convert into super anyway. So
No, you would
like
dash up, full
it's like a
conversion,
reward that you get
activate,
all the
and then
time.
go into super.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Like it's a reward that you get all the time, and I find it a
Yeah.
little bit less interesting. Instead, if you create a crush card that has some situational, like combo routes, that at least gives you, like something that is a little bit more peculiar to use, and honestly, not as oppressive because it's like, yeah, I get hit by Gal's back heavy punch, and sure, it is a crush counter. I get knocked down, and I get reset to neutral. You get some V gauge, but it kind of like ends there, right? It's not always so dangerous, like oh, I get hit by Urian's standing heavy punch and I just die.
Right. So you like how like Manot's heavy punch just knocks you back,
Yeah,
and she gets
exactly.
V
And
gauge for it, and then that's it. It's just like a
yeah, if you
strong.
have V trigger, you can convert from it, but it's like a once in a round thing
Right.
instead of being, every time I get a dash up combo and just do a million damage.
I like how sweeps crush counter. I like that
Yeah,
sweeps universal crush. It wasn't like that like at the very beginning they didn't implement that, but when they did, that was great. I thought that was a good idea in
I mean,
general.
in a way, I guess they brought that back for Street Fighter 6 because it seems like counter hit sweeps force a hard knockdown, which I guess is different in Street Fighter 6, but it's
Yeah.
still a unique property.
What about the reoccurring -2 on block situations in Street Fighter Five? What do you think about that?
Yeah, well, I mean, it seems like it was their solution for the fact that they had to implement a input buffer system for normals, right? Because
Oh yeah.
obviously, in a game like Street Fighter 4, where you didn't have that, create something like a move that is -3 on block, and you're not even guaranteed to get the punish just because the timing is so tight, right? Like it's basically a one frame link on defense if you
Yeah.
have a 3 frame normal.
Mm-hmm.
So the moment you implement that in Street Fighter 5, then you create a situation where you're basically guaranteed to get the punish if you know when the block stun ends. And so I think that's how they handled a lot of moves that they wanted to be relatively close to you, but at the same time they didn't want to be punished for just lose your turn.
Yeah.
So -1 is a problem because if you have a three framer and the other one doesn't, like that creates an issue. And -2 is just the perfect solution.
Plus throws start up in 5 frames, so it's perfect, If they do a light
Yeah,
punch,
yeah.
it beats it. Yada yada.
Mhm.
It's kind of funny you mentioned the -3 because in Street Fighter 6, if you punish something that's -3 with a 3 framer, you're gonna get a punish counter. And so that
Mhm.
might mean you can convert into a medium from that and get a full combo punish. Or even drive rush combo. That would be insane.
Yeah, that's true. I feel like I was mentioning for Street Fighter 5, the -2 was more of a kind of like band-aid solution because I feel like they didn't have the time to properly look at everything, and they kind of like then owned it, as the Street Fighter 5 thing. But for Street Fighter 6, I feel like they're gonna be a little bit more careful with these situations, especially because of the punish counter. I feel like a lot of moves are gonna have maybe a lot of pushback, so that instead of having the -3 situation being a full combo starter because of the counter hit that you get is going to be, instead of being standing light punch into, I don't know, a light special like light Tatsu for Ryu, for example, is gonna be standing light punch into a medium special like medium Tatsu, or
Oh, just a little
maybe
bit more
some
hits
other
then?
move where the light version doesn't knock down and the medium does. And
Yeah.
and then that gives your punish a little bit extra oomph without necessarily being a crazy punish where you get a full combo.
Still drain their drive gauge though. That's a pretty big punish in general, even
Yeah,
with a
that's
light button. Another thing too is the hit stop. Even recently with the emergency patch for Luke, they changed the hit stop on a standing light punch because it was hard, even with the input buffer, because the hit stop was so short in a lot of things. Even to this day, there's some things with very short hit stop, like
mhm.
Zeku's shoulder, the horizontal, or is it the horizontal? It's where he does the shoulder. He goes to the
Yeah, yeah, it
fireball.
is Delvanto. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, like the hit stop's so short on that. It's sometimes you just don't get the punish, especially when you play online. Or Vega's rolling attack. Do you remember what it's called in this game?
Yeah, in the older games it was Rolling Crystal Flash, but I think they changed it to Crimson Terror in Street Fighter 5.
Yeah, like tell me YouTube, like how many times have you guys played against a Vega online, and even though he knows he's minus, they always press light kick because they just know the hit stop is so short, you might mess it up every single time, man. Get counter hit by
Yeah,
that.
it's in that case, I guess it's more of a getting used to thing because obviously the hit stun, or not the hit stun, sorry, the block stun is consistent. It's always the same. It's just like you said, it's short. So if you're unfamiliar with the matchup, you kind of like lose some of that consistency that you have with every other character, right? And so it just feels weird. So I'm sure that they will do a better job with Street Fighter 6 to try and avoid those situations so
It seems
that
like there's a lot
like
of hit
it's
stop
a little bit more universal.
a lot of hit stop in Street Fighter 6. So I don't think we'll have that problem yet. Next thing I want to talk about what a lot of players complain about is there's too many Unga moves in Street Fighter 5. Too many super fast moving EX moves that are sometimes plus on block, you know?
I mean, there's plenty of examples, and I think the biggest culprits are charge characters.
Yeah, like
Like
Urian.
Urian is the great example. It's like you have the EX shoulder tackle 7 frame startup, then you have the EX knee drop, which is plus on block even if it hits you in the head pretty much.
Yeah,
Uh, you have Borog's EX dash straight. That's another great example.
plus
I mean,
one.
even those that aren't plus, like is the X dash low, it can still be really annoying. You have EX Zonk from Cody, and that's plus on block.
Yeah, I mean, at least you have to hold two buttons for that one. There's the weakness there, but
Yeah, that's why it's more plus than the X straight.
it's ridiculous. There's a lot of moves that are kind of like I don't want to play neutral or I want to skip neutral. Let's get straight to business. Kind of Unga moves like EX
Mhm.
Demon Flip. Like they had to nerf that. How many times? And there's a lot of that in Street Fighter
Yeah, I
Five.
think
Now that I think about it.
I think it's the way that they designed the game to be rushdown centric. Is that the fact that especially the rushdown characters do have access to these moves is because, for example, in the case of Urian, maybe Urian's frame traps are not necessarily the most powerful. They're very rewarding, but it doesn't stick to you like other characters do because his movement is not necessarily as good. So he has a lot of ways of getting back in. Once his offense is done, then he just gets back in. It's either safe or plus, right?
Hmm.
So it's kind of like an identity of design when it comes to Street Fighter 5. And if Street Fighter 6 is going to be more neutral based, just from the get go, I'm sure we'll see way less of these moves, especially if they're reactable. I mean, they're just not going to be nearly as good.
Well, the thing is like when I play like Ryu and I go against a Urian player, he can't even do the EX knee drop because it's so telegraphed that I can just parry it every time and punish him, right? It shuts down that move. And when you think about it, everyone in Street Fighter 6 is gonna have something that like that, you know, like if someone has some really telegraphed move that's really plus on block, you know, you can still parry it or use drive impact and just shut it down.
Yeah, 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 absolutely. I mean, there's plenty of examples that we can think of from characters from the past. But yeah, as I was mentioning, if it's a move that is reactable, then especially if you have the timing down for the perfect parry, you can legitimately get a punish on it every time if you're good at it. You know, like
Yeah, and
when the
that's the
meta is
real
gonna be very
upside
well
of
developed.
parry, you know, that people like about parry.
Hmm.
But now that I think about it, they're gonna have to redesign a bunch of things because what about characters like Blanca or Honda? You know, these characters are designed to be bully characters. And if they can't bully you with these moves, then how are they even gonna work in Street Fighter 6? You know, like you could just, you know, parry or drive impact, headbutt, or Blanca ball, you know? So what are they gonna do? They're gonna, you know, adjust how much they bounce the pushback, you know?
I feel like those moves necessarily are not going to change too much, although they might be adjusted for Street Fighter 6. Like for example, the butt slam, maybe you can steer it a little bit and that will change the timing to make the parry harder, for
Yeah.
example. But I think it's mostly that they're going to make their kit complement the strength of those moves. So like for example, Honda, right? The 100 hand slap is a bunch of hits. So you're very well incentivized to parry it because it's going to give you a lot of drive back.
Yeah.
And I think because of that, they'll make his throw really scary. Or maybe his, like his command throw, his Oicho grab, that
Yeah.
one's gonna do even more damage on a punish counter, for example.
Yeah.
Like they're just gonna build the character in a way where if you successfully detect that the opponent is gonna do something about that move that's really annoying, then you can punish them real good.
Hmm.
That's what I feel like they're gonna do. Well, another point with overdrive moves, especially in Street Fighter 6, is that they're an investment in drive meter, and if your get in for free move, if you will, or annoying move is an OD move, and your opponent correctly understands that you're gonna do it, and you get punished for it, especially a punish counter, you're gonna lose even more drive. So
Oh
that's
yeah,
gonna
that's
be
a good point.
devastating.
Yeah, if you just spam random EX moves and you get punished for it, it's gonna be even more punishing because of the extra drive gauge you're gonna lose. That's
Hmm.
true too. The last thing I want to talk about, Mir, is the dashes in Street Fighter 5. And
Oh
I
yes.
really wanted to do a separate video on this entirely just to really show people what I'm talking about, but I feel like there's a huge consistency issue with how dashes are implemented in the game in the sense that it's not necessarily how many frames the dash is that makes it good, it's the animation itself. And we
Yeah.
kind of had, I don't know how to word this, like shades of this with Nash because
Hmm.
in season 1 Nash had this issue where when he during the startup frames of Nash's dash, his head would kind of just veer down a little bit, but his body didn't actually move forward. And until like, I don't know, something ridiculous, right? Until like the ninth frame or something. So like the overall frames of the dash was super fast, way faster than it seemed. And this still exists with a bunch of characters in Street Fighter 5 because when we visually are looking for a dash or we think their opponent's gonna dash, we're looking for their body to move forward. That's the key thing before we react to it, you know?
I mean, we have other examples. I think since we mentioned them before, another egregious example is Honda. Honda in Street Fighter 5 has a 20 frame dash. It
Yeah.
doesn't feel like a 20 frame
No,
dash. It
it
feels
doesn't.
way faster.
It
And
doesn't.
like you said, it's mostly a matter of animation because you're not really counting on the frames total. You need to see that first, right? There's other moves like that, not just dashes. Like I think Alex EX Air Stampede is another great example. It's 30 frames total, but he's 10 frames on the ground.
Yeah.
So like it's 20 frames total pretty much when it leaves the ground. So it's the same situation. And so like you said, it lacks that consistency between the cast and it makes it difficult to react in a way that is, like sometimes you feel cheated that it's like, oh, I know that this dash is really long, but I still got, that they dashed up to me and threw me.
Yeah.
It just doesn't feel good.
Yeah. Like the idea is if you're laser focused on it, you should be able to react to it every time. Like how fast is Vegas Dash?
17.
It's 17. Like Vegas Dash, I feel like I can react to it so easily every time. But then there's reuse Dash where it's like a
Yeah.
blur coming forward. You know, it's like this for overheads too. There's some overheads that just seem so easy to react to. Like Ryu's overhead, I can react to it almost every time. But there's like
Mm.
other overheads that are exact same speed. It's just the animation is different and it's just
Yeah,
harder.
more deceiving. Yeah,
I
absolutely. I
wonder
mean,
if
the
that was
animation
intended.
is really, really important for this. And I think you bring up a good point with Vegas. And it seems, although I'm not 100% sure, the Street Fighter 6 dashes follow a similar philosophy where basically the dash itself is very fast, but there's kind of like a little bit of recovery at the end in the sense that you covered the distance of the dash immediately, but the character's not free to move as it reaches the end. You know, there's a little bit of recovery. So
Like
like you see
yeah,
the
the
movement
distance
immediately,
is
but you still
yeah.
have time to see what's going on.
Right. You don't want to go too extreme because then otherwise the dashes would feel too slow and it would all be easily reactable even if you weren't paying attention to it. But yeah, you're right. There has to be like a balance to it where, you know, the entire animation is complete and there's got to be some little recovery. We'll have to see
Mhm.
how it works in Street Fighter 6. I'm sure they're going to pay more attention to details like that and I'm definitely going to look for it and complain about it if I see it because that really bugged me about Street Fighter 5. It's something I wanted to talk about for so long, the
Mhm.
dash animations, and we got a little
Yeah.
hint of it, like I said, with Nash. But there's some other characters too that
Well, another thing that compounds this situation is, for example, and we mentioned this in other videos. After a throw tech in Street Fighter 5, you're relatively close, and when someone is freezing up on the defense, you know you get dashed in on and
yeah,
get thrown. But in Street Fighter 6, you're just so far away
after a
after a
throw
throw
tech,
tech. They're
right?
not gonna be able to dash at you.
Mm-hmm. And then there's the E-frame delay during the first season of Street
Oh
Fighter as
yeah, well
well.
that didn't
Oh
help.
man, just crazy, and
Yeah.
like
You
yeah,
would just see people
Urian.
just pressing light punch in neutral just to stop dashes and then get crush counter left and right because you were doing that instead.
We'll see how the input delay is on the RE engine with
Yeah,
the Street
hopefully
Fighters.
hopefully it's good, but I trust them to, like
I
release
trust it more
a
than Unreal
competent
Engine,
product.
dude, with the problems
Yeah.
they're having right now on PS5. All right, guys, let us know in the comments below what lessons you think Capcom has learned from Street Fighter 5. What some things you guys didn't like. We're not trying to hate on Street Fighter 5. Remember, we're not. We're just talking about some things that might or might not have carried over to Street Fighter 6. Let us know in the comments below.
Yeah, we
And
just want Street Fighter 6 to be the best it could be. That's all we want.
smiley face.
Smiley face.
All right, thanks for joining me with this mirror, and
Yep, no
we'll talk
problem.
again soon.
Bye
All right, guys.
bye.
Yeah, take care, guys.